Landfill Business Unit, Friday, 9th of September. This is the last business unit meeting of the triennium. I want to start with acknowledging the passing of Her Majesty the Queen. We won't do a minute's silence because I will defer that to full councils rather than this one. But hers was a life of service, and I always think it is very important to acknowledge service. And if we, the fact that she was appointing Liz Truss as Prime Minister 2 days ago, it shows that vow she made all those years ago, she stuck to absolutely. So, just acknowledging that. I'll now open with a karakia. Tuia ki ronga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki roto, tuia ki wahu, tuia te hera tangata, ka ronga te po, ka ronga te a, humi e, hui e, tā ki e. Now, I have no apologies for today's meeting. The order of business is as per the agenda at this stage. Now I think I have a couple of reminders I have to do. Yes, so we're live streaming. The live streaming stays on during the breaks, so you might want to turn your microphones off or move away from them. A reminder that there is no electioneering allowed in accordance with the Electoral Act inside these premises. And we've got Mike Schrewer on Zoom and everyone else is in person. Okay, so no apologies, order of business. Any interest, please update your interest register. We have no public forum. So I'll go to the confirmation of minutes on page 8 to 11. If I have someone who would like to move those. Thank you, Councillor Courtney. Second, Councillor Bryant. Any queries, concerns, corrections? I'll put the resolution. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Okay, so we now go to the chairperson's report. Oh, it's not a touch screen. Okay, I'll stop touching it. I was just trying to get rid of the pop-up box so I could see things. Right, so the chairperson's report is on pages 12 to 16. So, bit of a potted summary of our last 3 years. So I'll start with the summary and then we'll get on to the emergency fund. So it was quite exciting to look back on the 3-year journey. And I think there's just been the most phenomenal step change in so many areas, both, capital works and operations. And when you look at the step change, especially around, the life of the landfill, stormwater, but also in emissions, and you go, we have been short-staffed for a significant amount of that time. We've had COVID disruptions, we've had storm events. I think that makes it even more phenomenal. So when I gave my heartfelt thanks to Andrew Bishop for his work in managing our finances, to our General Manager Nathan Clark and our Operations Manager Brad Nixon, sorry Brad, but then also to all the staff that support this committee. So Mike Schrewer, Karen Lee, David Stevenson, Alec Lavertis and Richard Kirby. It was utterly meant, because without the team working together, we wouldn't be where we are. And thank you, of course, to my fellow committee members. This has been a real pleasure to be a member of this committee and to be able to chair it. So just thank you all, but thank you everyone for these amazing achievements in so many areas. Lastly, emergency fund. So we did sustain some damage up at the landfill. It was able to be managed. And I'll get Nathan to talk just a little bit more about that. But it did also highlight the need for maybe an emergency fund. So I'll hand to you, Nathan. You can talk a bit about the damage we sustained and some of the actions we had to undertake in that immediate period.
Yeah, through the chair. Thank you very much. I actually wasn't here at the time. I might have gone on holiday. So I've been told since then I'm not allowed to go on holiday anymore because seemingly when I go on holiday, there's bad events happen. So the landfill, however, stood up incredibly well to the event. We had slips around the site coming into the site, and we had one slip on down by the office that was unexpected. The other ones were sort of things that we thought might occur in such an event. But overall, the landfill stayed open. It closed for, I think, 4 or 6 hours in total, not because of anything at the landfill, but because Market Road got covered by a slip and the trucks couldn't get to the landfill. So I'm incredibly proud of the way the infrastructure handled it. Our new stormwater system was tested and actually held up and probably could have done slightly more. So it is actually, it's a testament to that system we put in. There were slips around the back side of the site and above the site, and the palisade wall stabilisation works that we'd put through there because we were concerned about instability basically precluded significant failures from occurring. So again, all of that work that we had done really did stand us in really good stead for the event. So fantastic. Now I'll hand over to Brad to talk about anything specific that happened on the day because, as I say, I wasn't there.
Thanks, Mr. Clark, through the chair. Like Nathan said, the landfill held up reasonably well during the event. We did have that one slip down by the weighbridge, which caused a little bit of concern, mostly because of the size of the trees that were hanging over there. But the landfill only really ceased operation due to the damage to Market Road. The initial response through the flooding wasn't to start off with a particularly large issue for the landfill. Generally, a lot of the traffic couldn't get there because of traffic queues and loss of access roads. But yeah, it ticked away quite nicely. There was a lot of water that came through the landfill through the event. The stormwater system managed that really well. And the detention pond downstream was really quite full at the peak of the event. I think it got to within about 1 metre of tipping over the top. So that was the highest we've ever seen it. So some post-event clean-up work involved cleaning out our drain underneath the access road and improving some of the drainage through that as well.
Thank you. Look, I'm now happy to open for any questions or comments on the report. And you'll see that the resolution has just been slightly tidied up for me. Mel.
Thanks, Madam Chair. You made reference just in your remarks before Nathan spoke about the establishment possibly of an emergency fund. Are you going to progress that?
Yeah. So basically, it would enable. It's not just about today's, the recent events, but it's just about future proofing. And so that, the importance of, we really saw the importance of the landfill at times like this and being able to respond very quickly to ensure that it is open and accessible, was just really highlighted. And so, look, 250,000 is within the delegation of the general manager, so it wouldn't be slowed down by, that's why I've chosen that figure, it wouldn't be slowed down by having to have a meeting, because if you're in the middle of a civil defence emergency, the last thing you need is to try and convene a meeting to do works required to get a landfill open or to make the operations safe. And so, so for me, this is just part of really another step of what we've been doing, which is about building resilience into our landfill. And this is another way as well to address that. So, so I've got the resolution, proposed resolution in my report. Thank you. Stuart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Judine. Yes. So I'd just like to endorse all your thanks to all the staff involved, Brad and Nathan and Andrew and Alex and those that come in from TDC as well. Really appreciate the support they've given this committee, and the way you've led us all has been really tremendous. I really appreciate that. You've really been in your element here.
I love landfill. What can I say?
Yeah, no, it's somewhat similar for me. So no, and as I think we've done, as you say, really well from where we were in the last term to the end of this term, having been here for the 2 terms. And certainly that all changed somewhat when Nathan came along. Yeah. So I think that was a real catalyst for the improvements we're seeing. So we really do appreciate all the efforts. And now I just have one other operational manager matter where we talk about the lithium batteries. And I've been thinking about this and actually have seen this in other communities where, and I wondered if we could perhaps run a pilot around this. So is that Men Shed and Huranui have built little depots for the people's communities to dispose of their batteries in the community. And I'm thinking of a community like Tapawera where there is no recycling, it's a low economic social, and we could perhaps use it as a trial. Get them to build something like this where they can dispose of their batteries in the community, and that way they're keeping them out of their landfill, because it's a real temptation there just to throw your battery in your rubbish back because there's no other unless you travel to Richmond. So
through the chair, we actually have I've been talking to some fire engineering experts about trying to develop something. There is no product in New Zealand that allows you, that is safe for battery disposal. One of the problems with battery disposal is that you put it in there and it breaks open and it's a lithium-ion battery, it'll go on fire. So you obviously need to try and make it so that it is safe. What I've been trying to do is develop a product with the help of some fire engineering people that basically makes the battery, when you deposit it, softly get deposited and then go inside a metallic container of some nature that is obviously protected from arcing the battery. But then if it did to go on fire, it actually has some sort of suppression element inside it. So like a CO2 container or something like that. I was hoping that I could have had a prototype for something like that could then be offered nationally to communities to put in a car park or put somewhere so that it becomes safe. I mean, one of my key concerns is when you start putting these things in a plastic bucket somewhere, next minute the bucket's on fire as well. So that's a big issue in and around these batteries, and particularly the lithium-ion batteries. Here at the council, we've got an aluminium system with sand in it outside, and that works well for someone who actually opens the lid and places it into the facility. But if you're doing it out in the community, you also got to consider vandalism or other people doing something that will then further exacerbate that. So yes, I'm totally into it.
And it's been looked into.
And it's being looked into. Yeah. No, I haven't got an answer quite yet. But there is definitely a plan to try that. So
there's definitely other communities that have been doing it, because I've seen on Men Shed's websites, particularly Amberley or Huranui, where they've actually put in them. So whether we could see how they've done it.
Well, I'm happy. I've had Karen Lee from Nelson City and I have been looking around trying to find products for it, because we have continually had concerns. I'm more than happy to talk to the Men Shed or see what they've done there. And in the event that I believe that it meets what I believe is a safe thing, then hey, fantastic. Yeah,
sounds good.
Otherwise, I'll try and
follow up and see if I can get some information to you.
That'd be fantastic. Yeah.
Thanks, Stuart. Trendy.
Thank you, Judine. A lot of this is great news, isn't it? Very good news story. I particularly like the bullet point 5.9 about our young folk wanting to be engaged, wanting to go and visit. And I think that's really pivotal that we continue to educate people, because that one person is going to tell umpteen dozen people who then will be inspired to do something. So I just want to acknowledge everything you've done, Nathan, to enable a safety plan for them to actually go on site and to look and to share the good news. So thank you.
Yeah, and considering the staff time to still actually see this as important, it really says a lot. Thank you. Mel.
Thanks. Chair, would you indulge me just for a second? I've now found my notes and I'd like to go back to the emergency fund. And my questions were, is the amount of 250,000 adequate? That was one of the questions. And how was it arrived at?
So it was derived based on the delegation.
Yes,
so
I realise that, but is that sufficient?
Look, it would really depend on the level of the works required.
Yeah.
Nathan, if it was an event that required more than that, what's the process that you would have to go through? And under the Emergency Works Act, could you, if it was a bigger thing, what could we do?
If I was to do that, I would obviously contact the chair, and talk to the GM of Infrastructure of Nelson City Council, and the GM of Infrastructure can obviously approve higher value items with the approval of the chair as well. So, there's a process. It wouldn't be as fast, but I don't think that would stop it. For me, the really important piece about this fund is it also allows us to do this independent of the balance sheet issues. You sort of put some money aside for it, notionally. If it gets used, so be it. It gets used. We're not worried about the effect on finances, and then we top that back up over time. So for me, there's two elements. A, it's fast and it's available, but B, it's also it takes away any stress from the balance sheet at that point.
Yes, I can understand that. My view is that it's inadequate actually, but I'll bow to your judgment on that. Just put the view out there.
Yep.
Through the chair, I think it's prudent. The 250,000 may or may not be enough, but it's no different to what TDC and NCC are doing in an emergency. What we're doing is we're getting on with the work, and we will report that back to our council at the appropriate time. And that's just for the need to get our cities back up and running. So this is a prudent approach. This just allows, in the normal circumstances, I presume Nathan and Brad would just be getting on with the work and reporting that back. But this just gives us a bit of a buffer to for the transition. Yeah. So it sort of is what it is. Is it enough? Probably not, but who knows?
Thank you. Okay, I'll move the resolution.
Through the chair, can I just say something? And I know it's unusual for an officer to comment, but I do need to give Nathan and Brad a heads up and a thumbs up, really, for the excellent work that they have done at the landfill. I think the work that Nathan and his team have done has shown that they have been proactive, and the landfill has, by and large, survived the event, in part due to the work that they've done. And I know Nathan was on leave for the event, but I do need to give Brad a special thanks and kudos. He was brilliant. His communication was fantastic. It was seamless. As the group controller, I didn't have to worry about the landfill. He was that good. So I'll leave it at that.
No, absolutely endorse all your statements, and thank you for giving them. Okay, so I'm happy to move the recommendations, as we can see as amended up on the screen. Second by Trindy. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll now go to the General Manager's report on page 17. Thank you, Nathan.
Through the chair, yes, it's been a busy period of time. Obviously, we've been doing all the works, the airspace, the buttress, all those things at York Valley. We've also been now entering into the works for Eves Valley, the access ray, improving the leachate systems, etc. The hospital boiler project is moving forward and should settle in the next couple of weeks. And also, we've obviously had the storm events. And so my thanks also go to Brad. And I was away. I felt guilty, but he did it. And we had a team of people, contractors behind us that stepped up. And they did it well. I'm very pleased that the infrastructure we put in place also facilitated, that it could be done well. So, overall, I'm very proud of the assets that we have and how they've performed. We do have a few things that we'll need to try and tidy up. Obviously, the landfill has had slips around it, though some of those slips are on private property alongside the landfill. So there's some conversations to be had with those neighbours about, remedial work so that we don't keep getting failure onto the landfill. And so we've had conversations with some of those neighbours at this stage. One of the neighbours who leases a Nelson City Council piece of land has indicated that he would be willing to relinquish some of that land back to us for us to manage, so that we'd be able to keep control what is a quite failure-prone section of land. So that will be something we'll just be dealing with over the next short while. Yes, but overall, yeah, it's handling it well. And now there's a few minor pieces to tidy up now that the sludge is sort of drying out a bit. But yeah, so overall, it's very, very good. From a finance perspective, obviously, this report only goes up to the end of the year, end of last calendar year. We had quite a significant surplus for the year, but there were quite a few one-off factors involved in that. So, and it also, we had some cumulative losses from previous years, which, and we wouldn't want to remit money back to the two councils, because some of the surplus is actually one-off changes in terms of interest rate changes and those sorts of things, which will come back to haunt us if we give that, back to the councils. But anyway, that can be discussed by Andrew probably in the annual report. Overall, as I say, there's a lot of good stuff going on. One thing that I would like to ask is, in recent times, the cost containment of in the emissions trading scheme, there's been quite a lot of developments going on in the emissions trading scheme. It's sort of come up since this, but the report was written where the Climate Change Commission has indicated that or recommended to government to increase what's called the cost containment reserve, which is essentially the reserve where they release more carbon credits to try and control the price of carbon in the market. And they've indicated a new price that they're recommending to the government of $171 a tonne, going up the next year to $223 a tonne. And I want the board to consider whether or not they think we should, that the position we have at the present time is appropriate. If there would be a very big step change again in that. And Andrew may be able to discuss that further, but it's just one of those things that we might want to consider. At the moment, the carbon price is around $85 a tonne, but historically, it's tracked quite closely to the cost containment reserve price. So if it goes to $171 a tonne on the cost containment reserve price, it's possible that the price of carbon will jump closer towards that. And up to date, our position has been, or the board's position has been, that we're not speculating on carbon, and that we're only buying carbon far enough forward to secure certainty of carbon price for our business planning processes. And the position that we would take here would be changing from certainty to being, we think it's probably going to go up, and we're trying to reduce the impact of that cost on the community. And that's something that the board needs to consider. It's not my choice in that respect. So it's more than happy to take questions on that point. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Open for questions. I've just got a first one myself, just in relation to the truck exhaust and the small fire on dry sawdust. Is that a repeat event? Have we had that happen before? I had a memory that we had.
Yes, we have had that happen twice, but and so there was an element of improvement of operational processes, making sure that the landfill surface is a lot flatter, because there was a lump of sawdust on there. And I think the previous one wasn't sawdust; it was a mattress or something like that. It may be an increasing issue. A lot of the trucks these days have this emission control and carbon control thing, where they basically heat up the exhaust to a very high, about 1,000 degrees, and it burns all the soot out of the exhaust facility. And they mean to do that off the landfill. But if it happens while they're on the landfill, then obviously it's hot. So we are considering whether we go back to some of those truck owners and say, well, please, can you shift your exhaust higher so that you can avoid that. But anyway, we haven't done that at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Trinity.
Yeah, thanks, Judine. Well, that brings me to the health and safety bullet point 4.3, and it says that the fire risk management plan has been prepared but has not been received yet. Have we got a time frame of when that may be received?
I met with the fire management team about a week ago, and the biggest, there's pretty much the plan is drafted. I wanted them to go back and consider some cover aspects of the report. So at the moment, one of our big risk areas is that we have all the sawdust coming into the landfill, and the sawdust has been historically used as a temporary or daily cover, and it's not ideal. But it helps us with the compaction of the landfill because you spread it out and mix it with other waste, and it doesn't get in a big lump because obviously sawdust is a low density product. I've asked the fire management team to come up with a series of risk categorization for the way we cover the landfill each day, and it will link into weather and fire conditions in the community. So we're basically, in the winter when it's wet, it probably can put sawdust on it. If it's drier or a medium risk, you put sawdust on, but you actually run the water cart over it and damp the sawdust down. And when it's high risk or very high risk, you don't do that and you use clay or some other cover material. So I will wait and see what they come back in their recommendation. It's possible that they'll tell us what actually just putting the sawdust on the top is not acceptable. When do I think that report will come through? In the next 4 weeks, probably, I'd say. Yeah.
Can I make a comment, Judy? That's great. And it's great that you've got your finger on the pulse yet again. I just have one little concern is when you talked about trucks and moving their exhaust systems. That's a huge ask and probably not something they'll be able to achieve overnight. So I'm just concerned about that risk element and how we're still, as a board, doing our bit to mitigate as much risk as possible. Thank you.
Through the chair, there are 3 trucks, to our knowledge, that have that facility that where the exhaust pipe is low at the present time. So we know what those trucks are. We try to make them sit off the landfill while to cool down before they go onto the face. And it's been highlighted by these events so that they're being more vigilant around that than we have been in the past. The other engineering control that we can put in, essentially, which isn't out, is the trucks are outside of our control per se. When they're someone else's truck, we can be quite hard nosed if we wanted to and say you must do that, otherwise you're not allowed to truck on the site. We could choose to do that. At the moment, that's not what we're choosing to do. The other one is obviously keeping a very flat landfill surface so that there's a fairly significant gap between. And if we think that the conditions are getting dry, then we can use a water cart to keep the surface of that dumping area wet all the time. So that will reduce the risk of fires in that area. We might think, as an example, that it's been wet, but again, we've been actually out with the water cart recently because there's dust up there already. It does dry out pretty quick when there's a wind, etc. So we do have to be cognizant of the weather conditions quite significantly.
Thank you. Look, what I'll probably do is just defer any discussion on hedging of NZUs to the business plan. And as Nathan highlighted, also any discussion on the surplus, you'll see that it was on page 43, item 9, the annual report, and we can discuss that then. So with those 2 matters set aside, are there any other questions on the quarterly report? Mel.
Yes, thanks, Judine. Nathan, you mentioned under stormwater management that things have significantly improved, and that's great. Is that a treatment that you introduced following the the break in stormwater entering the streams and that sort of thing? Is it a result of that, or did you treat it previously?
Through the chair, when I joined the landfill business unit, we had what was the original stormwater ponds from the site in 1986. So nothing really had been done to those ponds in a very long time. And we had received, I don't know, a few weeks, I can't remember the specifics, sorry, but a few weeks after I joined, we received an abatement notice because we were discharging sediment-laden water to the stream during essentially every rain event. We took it on ourselves to improve that situation. The board, thankfully approved the financing to do that, and we actually built during that winter. We built a big pond at the bottom, and then we obviously the plan was a big pond at the bottom, another pond halfway up the hill, and a bunch of other pieces. And then we obviously we ran that for a very short period of time to see whether or not it would settle out enough of the material to meet the requirements, and that wouldn't. And we installed the chemical dosing. In order to put in chemical dosing plan, and we had to get a new resource consent for the discharge to water and for the chemical dosing. So that process has been done over the last year and a half, and it's now nearly fully complete. There's I say nearly fully complete. There is still some planting to be done on the SRP ones and just beautification, protective works, and we still haven't installed a new western dirty water drain. What we've done, and we went out to design. We designed it up, and we couldn't get a contractor who was willing to build it. It was essentially a rockline channel down a 40-degree slope. They decided it was too dangerous, so we actually went back out to design to try and find an alternative solution. And at the present time, what will happen is that the design will mean that once the buttress goes in, then there'll be a swale at the back of the buttress. Will take that water from the western side, which is very steep, across to the eastern side of the landfill and into the SRP1 or an existing landfill ponds. So that piece of work hasn't been done because it can only be done after the buttress has been completed. So,
yes, thanks for that. I'm aware of some of that too, but my question was really about the coagulant that's being included or added to the water. As I wanted to know more about that. So that sort of treatment that
hasn't been done until recently. Part of it has.
And what is it exactly?
It's aluminium chlorhydrate, I think, or polyaluminium
salt and
polyaluminium chloride, one of the two. It's a salt, and it's just coagulating those clay particles so they will actually settle. Otherwise, they just don't settle in the water and they just stay there. So
So you haven't answered my questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Stuart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in relation to Eves Valley, Nathan, you are procuring the weighbridge and the all-weather access upgrade. Was that scheduled work or is that being brought forward? And is there some catalyst for doing this work now?
It was scheduled work, so I can't tell you off the top of my head exactly when. I think we might have even carried over some money from last year on part of it. The weighbridge, we hold the weighbridge in hand now. Yes, it's a precursor to more future works. But ideally, the reason we started the all-weather access was because we simply can't get there in the rain at the present time, or when there's a flood over the ford. And our staff feel a duty to try and go and inspect, and that constitutes a risk from a health and safety perspective because they'll try and drive across the ford, and they're going to have to make a judgment every time they do it. So we're going to put some box culverts across the ford, raise it up so we can get in. It's a single lane entry, and we'll put even in the future we think we can accommodate. Even if Eves Valley is open as a full landfill in the future, a single lane there by having some passing lanes on either side of that ford and essentially a
understand that. Yeah, and I guess my question also relates so that doesn't change anything about the life of York, or there's no change around that. That's what I'm.
No, what this will do is allow us to begin using Eves Valley for hail management. If the board choose to allow that hail blending facility, it's just included in the business plan as one of the funded items going forward. And it also will allow us to use Eves more effectively if we did just want to discharge contaminated or hazardous material to Eves, which are the two things that we, in the nearest future, we are proposing to do. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Trinity.
Yeah, sorry, I should have put this request in earlier. The landfill waste volumes chart, I actually can't read it on my screen. I don't know if you could share the screen or if we could just have that printed out. That's page 24.
Can you read that? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Struggle. Yeah, no, that's,
Yep,
no,
we'll just
I
give the
can't
staff a
read.
minute and they'll be able to do that. I don't think it's any easier in paper.
No.
But thank you, Andrew.
I'll have a look as well. Is it just the same?
I think it's better.
Oh, really?
Sorry.
Sorry.
I guess what the intent of that. Was just to indicate that we'd had that 81,000, and the split of the 81,000 was very similar to previous years, but it was just an overarching, a bigger quantum overall. I mean, I think the previous year was 78,000, so we had gone up by 3,000 tonnes during the last year.
Nathan, could you just tell me what the colour codes, if I understood what the colours meant, that would make the graph mean something, I think.
Off the top of my head, I think the blue would be general waste, the and commercial industrial. Then you've got residential, and then the one that changes a lot is the red one, which is usual special waste. So that's generally those are the ones that changes up and down, as you can see. The bulk
Trinity.
There we go.
Ah, there we go.
Yeah, so you'll see special waste is one that has increased quite a lot. Construction has stayed roughly the same, so is commercial. But yeah, the big change is the special waste, which of course is the one that it's special.
One of the things that one of the things we are trying to do is get better information than that through the Weybridge software upgrade, which will allow us to not only identify the types of waste, but also where they come from and try and disaggregate that information further, so we've got more resolution of the data.
Okay, thank you for that. If there's no further questions, there's resolution on page 17. Do I have someone happy to move that? Thank you. Move Mel, second Stuart. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Brad, will go to your fee waiver report. You can probably take it as read. It is a retrospective one. Everyone here was aware of it. Anything else you wish to add to your report?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the Chair, no, nothing really to add to the report at the moment. The total tonnages received are closing in on that initial 200 tonne. We're just waiting on some final feedback from the resource recovery centres.
Yeah, so probably good that we've got the third resolution in there with a bit of flexibility. Alec.
No, I think the third one covers it. We went to a public meeting last night with the Tahuna residents, and there will be a need for those residents at some time to go through the same process that the rest of the residents went through, and there was discussion at that meeting that we would consider the same. So if the 200 tonnes is exceeded, then we come back through another report. Okay, that's cool.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, we can probably just do retrospective again if we need to. But at this stage, are we all happy with 2 and 2? Okay, great.
In fact, I'm so happy, I'm happy to move the resolutions.
I'm happy to second then. Okay, so no further questions. Move Stuart, second Judine. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Okay, now there is morning tea. There's a nice morning tea for Entertranium. Do people want to break now, or do you want to get into the annual report, which will take us a little bit? We will still be finishing on time, but...
Yeah, right. Well, we'll see me right now, because I've got someone that's trying to get hold of me.
Okay. Right, we'll break for morning tea, but don't miss out. And we'll be back here at 10:30. Thank you. So we're now going to go to the annual report, and we have Nathan and Andrew here for that. So I'll hand over to you two.
Through the chair, last year was a pretty good year. We did everything well. We had one exception, let's say, to that, where during the construction of the stormwater system, we had a short period of 4 hours where we overflowed some sediment-laden water. We got it wasn't an abatement notice, it was a infringement notice for that, which we've obviously settled. Otherwise, pretty much everything went to plan, and we met with all of our goals. I'm more than happy to take any questions in relation to any of those compliance or performance measures.
Andrew, I'll go to you for the finances, and then we'll do questions on the full report all at once.
The finances are covered under section 6 on page 41 following. This shows an accounting surplus of $2 million, which has got quite a lot of factors behind it. So there's quite a lot going on in here behind the numbers. If we just work through from the top of the revenue account towards the bottom, the landfill fees, we've had a lot more volume than budgeted, and so we've had a significant increased income from that. Working through the expenses, we've the depreciation's a lot lower than budget. The budget has assumed the delivery of the capital works program last year and earlier this year, which didn't happen in the same, they were delayed or not completed. The next line on impairment you'll see is in brackets, and it's the same figure as the previous year. Previous year, the valuation, we wrote down some assets. This year, with the increase cost of things, the price indexes have moved up, and so we've recovered that. So that's just an accounting entry. The operations and maintenance is significantly above budget, 1.6 million. And that's largely because of some of the works which might be regarded as being capital in nature, like the extending the airspace, is from an accounting perspective an operational expense because we don't have an asset. We just got a hole in a hill. It is got a significant economic benefit, but from an accounting perspective, it's a cost. So that's where it's hitting. We've also had to pay consultants to do support the team in projects and the like. Post-closure cost provision, you'll see is in brackets again, 150,000. This is the provision for the costs after closing a landfill. So we've got 2 landfills. We've got one that is closed that we are incurring costs on, and we have got one that is operational that we are providing for the costs when it closes. So what the accounting treatment requires of us to do is to estimate what that liability is going to be, inflate it for when we expect it to occur. So they're pretty soft numbers starting to come in. Then we discount it back because to have $1 in 2040, you don't need $1 today. So that's $1 to pay $1 in 2040, you might need 75 cents or something now to invest it to have it. So that's called a net present value. There's been some big movements in each of those factors. First factor is the cost of the recognised cost to close the landfill and to look after it after it's closed. So this year we've spent money on dealing with the gas at Eves Valley. So that cost has come in here. We've made a recognition of the cost to maintain the leachate line. And there's been changes in inflation rates, which have increased the costs. And there's a significant change in the interest rate that is used to calculate what the liability needs to be now in today's dollars. So that rate, we use the Treasury's forecasts. They have a table that we've used. In previous years, that's gone down. The interest rates have gone down from when the landfill was, the business unit was started. And so there has been a benefit in the past which has helped hide, almost hide or cover up, so to speak, for a landfill, other costs that we were recognising. So I have made comment that I expected adjustments in this area during the year. I just didn't realise how big they were going to be both ways. The actual change in the interest rate was 1.8 million. So that's a significant gain as well, but it's been offset by the additional inflation and additional costs that we have incurred or expect to incur from what we'd seen previously. Emissions trading scheme, next big adjustment. So the emissions trading scheme is we incur a liability for our emissions of methane from the landfill, and we have to pay for those emissions using carbon credits, which we have to buy and then surrender to the government. They use a calendar year for that. So at June, we have to estimate what our liability is going to be. Last year, we used the liability is based on the volume of waste we receive multiplied by our unique emissions factor or a standard factor. We used to use a standard factor, but we moved to a unique emissions factor. That dropped on the actuals for the December 21 year more than we had estimated in June. It was until you actually did the measurement in November and December. So that resulted in $500,000 off the top of my head credit, which we have looked at in previous meetings, but it's appropriate to mention now. And so we didn't need to redeem or surrender as many carbon units. So this year's liability, we have used the carbon units, some of the carbon units that were left over from planned for last year. And of course, they're cheaper because we're using the oldest ones up first. So that's resulted in a significant gain there. However, the cost of carbon has gone up significantly, currently circa $85 compared with $27 and $25 that we were using in these figures. So Nathan referred to this earlier, and I think you've decided to look at that in the business plan. But that gives you the context. It's a huge increase going forward. We are protected to the extent that we hold units that we have purchased for this current year and for next year. So we can plan in the budget, in the annual plan for next year quite confidently, well, relatively confidently, because the volumes may be different than what we have budgeted for. And if history is anything to go by, that's likely to be the case. The biggest number is the local disposal levy, which is what we pay the two councils for use in their solid waste activities. Consultancy is high, reflecting the lack of resourcing within the the regional services business unit, and also just the volume of work that has been done in the last year. There's been significant work done in asset management and operations management, planning. And it comes at a cost. End result, $2 million accounting surplus, of which you've now put 250 aside for a contingency reserve. We've, as Nathan mentioned earlier in the the general manager's report, we have had losses in the past, which we have now caught up. But and the balance of the surplus is really this movement in the interest rate in valuing the post-closure cost provision. In the past, it's been the other way. And so it is viewed as being appropriate for the credit to go back to customers in future, given that they've borne the cost in the past. And the terms of reference of the committee enable us to do that, because it is our view that that movement in the interest rate is an extraordinary item. Happy to take any questions.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Andrew. Brad.
Sorry, Madam Chair, just before we proceed further, I do need to point out that the figures that are contained in the annual report and in the draft business plan do not take into account the $250,000 that we're proposing to retain from the surplus. So some of these numbers will change, especially things like the projected disposal fees as well.
Okay, so the annual report, it shouldn't have any impact on the annual report. It's just on the business plan. Yeah. Okay. So, yep, we'll remember that. Okay. Okay, and I saw a question over here. Stuart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions for Andrew, just in relation to the financials. And I'm looking at the statement of comprehensive revenue and expenses. And I think I know the answer, but I just want to check. So, Andrew, the local disposal levy is exactly the same as budgeted. Is that not related to volume? Is it just a set fee? Whereas the waste levy has gone up somewhat.
Through the chair, correct. The waste levy is fixed in the annual plan. The local disposal levy is fixed in the annual plan and so becomes self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay, so that is what we pay the two councils, what is agreed.
Because they have to submit in,
yeah,
and we have the lower of the two, and then it is what it is.
Yeah. The waste levy just relates to the increase in volume through the...
Two factors there. We pay that to the Ministry of Environment based on the tonnage over the weighbridge, and it went from $10 a tonne to $20 a tonne and is going $30 a tonne. If I'm,
And then
so it's
40
volume
after
related,
that.
and the increase from previous years is because it doubled in price.
You know, with that, I would have thought that it would have gone up perhaps more than that with the increase, although probably the volume hasn't come through on this because of the end of financial year so much.
The price was expected.
Yeah.
So we had budgeted for the increase in price, but the volume is greater than budgeted. And so we got additional income, additional expense.
Yeah.
Purely
Understand
volume
that.
related.
And then just up in revenue, other recoveries, we budgeted 300,000, but there was only 60. That seems a little bit out.
Just a little. Yeah, I skipped that going through. That's due to the delay in the Pioneer purchase. So that is the recovery of gas and electricity from Pioneer. But we had budgeted to do that at the beginning of the year and receive sales of electricity or steam to the hospital, and rather than, so we would get the gross income rather than the net.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Trundy, did I see your hand up? No. Mel.
Well, I have one coming up. Question, Andrew. There's a overspend there on 6.5.6 in relation to consultancy costs were 634,826 above budget. Now, I read in here somewhere, I might have been in the chair's report, I think, about a global sort of arrangement for consents and that type of thing. Can you explain to me where we're going with this? Are we still going to have to go one by one? Or I got quite excited when I read about the global, I think the word you used.
Through the chair, yes, we received a inverted commas global earthworks consent during the year. Obviously, there's a lot of money in consultants' time going into the planning and all the consent application for that. And we received that. Basically means that any of the earthworks that we do within the landfill proximity, which is there's a designated boundary of that, then we only need to basically tell the council and give them an outline plan of what we're doing, and we don't need to go through consenting process anymore for those works. So we have stepped forward quite a long way in regard to that. It's one of the many things the consultants have been helping us, with obviously fire planning. There's a bunch of different things that we've been trying to get on top of with the planning.
However, the consultants are doing a lot of work now on our forward consents for the next life beyond the current landfill. And so that's quite a significant piece of work. And then we've had at various stages where we can some secondment of consultants for, like 20 hours a week to support the reduced staff.
So was there a drop in that? That'll, do you think?
Yeah.
No, into the future.
What's our consultancy budget going for? Can we deal with that in the business plan?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we'll do that. So, yeah, I'll put that question on hold for there. That'll be great. Because there are staffing proposals going in. But, of course, like so many areas, it is about successful recruitment as well. Yeah. Okay, so, Andrew, any other highlights or changes? It is as it is, as tabled. There are no changes. Okay, and of course we'll see the performance, performance achievements, pages 34 through to 41. Just keeping time in mind, and we've still got some meaty reports. I probably won't go through those, but I think, the fact that you see the words achieved, or that things are, progressing or in progress. I'm cognizant we have had some capital works delays, and we've got a carryover report that's separate, but they are progressing. Some of the delays are beyond our control, but the works are well in train. So, I think as we've highlighted, just acknowledging, great work again this year. And, and we have closed off a lot of projects as well. Stuart.
I'm happy to move the resolution, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So resolutions are up on the board. So move Stuart. Thank you. Seconded Mel. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much and appreciation for your work for the year and on those reports. Andrew in particular, a lot of work in those accounts. Okay, so we've now got the carryover report and I'll go to you. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm assuming, can I take the report as read? Excellent. We have approximately $2 million of carryover request for this financial year to next financial year. Around about half of that figure relates to the purchase of the Pioneer contract and assets. The remainder of it spread across various items which have proceeded on site, but possibly not as fast as we would have liked, bearing in mind that there has been a lot happening. I think the delivery for the past year has been very, very good. Some of the money has been allocated in a single lump sum, but as, for example, the collection network for flare and gas, single lump sum, but there's a significant design component required in that. That design is progressing well. The bulk of the materials for that is on site and physical works are due to commence shortly, which will see that carryover money spent in rapid progression. Take any questions if there's any.
Okay, thank you very much. Look, I've got a question myself, just in relation to, sort of 4.5 is where I thought of it, but just any impact that this may have on the deliverability of the 2022-2023 capital works and renewals program, because, we already have a program for that financial year. We've got quite a few carry forwards. We still have resourcing issues. So have you had to do some movement in that, or what impacts?
There hasn't been a lot of movement in that. In the second half of what year are we in now, 21-22, we brought in some additional resources through an external consultancy firm to basically provide overarching project management on the site, pulled it all into a single point of contact for us. And he's been really making a lot of great progress, getting contractors lined up, contracts done, progressing all of these works. Like I touched on before, a lot of the carryover relates to a package of work that always was intended to stretch over a couple of years of delivery. So we're not anticipating it will have a major effect on the capital works progress in the next financial year. There is a lot lined up where we've got additional contractors coming into work, so there'll continue to be a pretty extensive capital program at the landfill.
Thank you. And just my next question relates to 4.7.2, which is just about the consents for eaves. And it just notes that they're currently sitting with TDC for their action. Is there any time concerns, or was that sort of timing already programmed and this is progressing as expected?
Yeah, so this is simply the consent for the existing stage 2. And the application was lodged prior to the old consent expiring, so we're able to continue on with activities under the old consent. This is just working through finalising a few details to allow us to retain stage 2 as an emergency backup for York, but also to allow us to do things like dispose of inert material on site.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on the carryover report? Okay, I'm happy to move. Second by Trindy. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. So we now go to page 68, which is the gas reuse options report. I'll hand over to you, Nathan.
Thank you.
And we do have a tabled extra pages. Has everyone got that beside them? It's just the headings on the table were not there. So this just provides that slight context setting that you might have missed when reading. I think it was pages 73 and 74. And so I'll hand over to you, Nathan.
Thank you. Through the chair. As you're aware, we have some excess gas at York Valley and we have excess gas at Eves Valley. And this basically is trying to set the context about what, if anything, we do to reuse that gas. What I tried to do in developing this is trying to understand some generic principles around why we might want to do something. You know, whether it's obviously got to not have too much adverse effect on operational requirements. Ideally, it has an economic return to us. It's got to have reasonable capital commitments for the councils. If it can support the community's well-being, that would obviously be ideal. So there's a bunch of sort of generic thought processes around the selection of what options we could do. I then obviously drilled down into what are the generic options. You know, whether we do nothing, whether we create some electricity somewhere, whether we use it for heat in a boiler somewhere, or whether we try and turn it into a transportable fuel that we can use, you know, as a replacement for diesel or some other fuel. So they're all the generic options. And then I dug down a bit further, which is where table 2 came into, and looked at the benefits of the various options. In the big picture thinking, doing nothing, I don't personally believe is appropriate. We've got a lot of gas. We are burning it in a flare. We are reducing our carbon emissions because we're burning it in a flare. But it's a huge amount of energy that's just not being used for any positive purpose. And I think that it would be prudent for the board to consider whether we can use it for a positive purpose. In terms of what other people generically do with this gas, historically in New Zealand, most other landfills would put a cogen engine in and burn it in a cogen engine, basically produce some electricity and export the electricity and sell the electricity. Marlborough has a system in there, you know, a bunch of the other landfills have that as well. In our case, we can do that. That is something we could do. It doesn't create much additional value to the community, and it creates essentially no additional value to the climate. So we're burning it in a flare. We could burn it in an engine. It's no real difference. We make a minor improvement from a carbon perspective because a small amount of New Zealand's electricity is non-renewable, but the bulk of it is renewable anyway. So there's not a lot of benefit there. We would potentially make an economic return, so there would be a positive economic return with that sort of option. So that's, you know, a cogen system is what other people have done historically. And it isn't a solution that could be feasibly used. Looking into the community well-being, the best answer I could see was creating an amenity that the entirety of the community might be able to use while burning that and create some other economic return. So in the context, you could use it in school pools, you could use it in hospital pool, you could use it in other things like that, or you can make yourself a hot pools facility if you wanted to, which was where I came from. In conversation with Parks and Reserves and Nelson City Council, the Brook Camp and Eureka Park up in the Brook Valley is underutilised. The landfill nearly butts up to that piece of land, so we could just pipe the gas or hot the steam across to that. You know, there'd be one property that we'd have to get permission to go across. It's a potential thing for using that and creating some sort of community asset that, you know, amenity value. So that was a broader context of what I was thinking around in that. And then the other option was we could take the gas and we could clean it up and compress it and basically use it like LPG or CNG and use it in vehicles. The complication comes in is because the landfill at York Valley is covered by the ETS, we have to demonstrate the effective destruction of the gas that's produced. So if we tried to bottle the gas at York Valley and sell it for diesel, we'd have to be able to test the vehicles or the way we burned that to demonstrate and to prove that it was destructive. Otherwise, we'd be still left with the ETS costs associated with that gas. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to try and do that on small scale at York Valley. We couldn't, as an example, feasibly bottle it and sell it to people for barbecue gas because we couldn't test that the barbecues were actually burning efficiently. So that wouldn't work. But what we could do as York Valley is bottle it and potentially put it into a bus fleet and test the bus fleet. Or we could reasonably put it into the crematorium or the tug at the port or something like that. So there are other options that we could do. It would have to be a small enough number of uses that we could feasibly test each year those uses to make sure that we destructed the gas efficiently. Eves Valley, however, is not covered by the ETS at the present time. Because we don't put any waste into Eves Valley, we don't have to remit an ETS thing that has a positive cost. So we could do some of these other activities because we've already paid for those emissions in the past with the ETS trading scheme. So we could potentially bottle the Eves Valley gas and sell it as a fuel source for other purposes. You might say, why are you considering this? Because it's a complex piece of equipment, and I agree with that. But the benefit of compressing it and using it as a fuel or a transportable fuel is that you displace other fossil fuels and you can get a significant additional carbon abatement from it. So if we are really trying to drive down carbon, then that might be a way of us driving down another 10 or 20,000 tonnes of carbon in the community, which is a pretty significant amount if we wanted to. So there are options there. I've been through these. I've got some generic costings on some things, but I haven't looked at the detailed feasibility and the complexity in the back of them. And essentially what I'm asking in this report is for the board to consider whether they're willing to or would like to look at an individual option. I've recommended option 6, which is essentially a community facility for York Valley and bottling the Eves Valley gas. So it's doing two different things at 2 different sites because of the different constraints of the different sites. But it does add complexity to the overarching system, and they are expensive options compared to putting a gen set in and using it just as electricity as an example. So, and I'm more than happy to answer questions. What I guess I'm asking out of this is, in the event that the board agrees that that we should look at those options, then I'm asking for permission to essentially investigate the feasibility and business cases around those options.
So just to clarify, just because it's not in the online record, so option 6 is what?
A combination of options. I don't actually have that in front of me. I don't know why I did have it. It's essentially a combination of options. One of them, which is for community benefit, i.e. a hot pools or similar facility within, and for the York Valley gas and a bottling facility or some sort of cleanup facility for bio-CNG for the Eves Valley gas. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
York Valley, some sort of hot pools or similar. Eves Valley bottling it for a transportable fuel.
Okay, and just, I guess I'll start with an overarching question is, I guess around the timing or the, I guess the narrowing of options now. I guess if the options are too broad, that's a significant piece of work. I'm just wondering about the narrowing of the options at this stage, or if you felt that there was more work that maybe needed to be done before then narrowing down.
Through the chair, I'm more than happy to either go out to experts and get more information in regard to each of the different options, if the board would like that. I narrowed this down. I guess that I chose to do so because I was trying to do my business planning and figure out where the funding was for the future and trying to put that in there. So I needed to decide, rightly or wrongly, whether or not we can, so that allow forward in, the demonstration. But I don't have any particular, I'm not wedded to any particular one of these answers. It was the one that I felt would give the best overall benefit, but I recognise that it is also a more complex solution, and it is going to include more capital expenditure. So, I recognise that could be a problem to the councils.
Yeah.
I also thought that I could narrow it down because this, in my previous life, prior to being the general manager, this is the sort of stuff I did. And so I have a fairly significant background in these things and, was comfortable with the knowledge base that I have. But clearly I don't necessarily think that I've shared that as well as maybe I could have. So,
Stuart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just had a question in relation to the Eves Valley first, particularly. So any consideration given to just piping it to the Eves Valley sawmill and then potentially using and just selling it to them?
I've had some conversations with some staff. I haven't talked to the manager himself at this stage. We have tried to book meetings, but I haven't got there. Eves Valley have some available fuel for heat. So one of the things that you do when you pipe gas to someone is if you just use it for heat, then the value of it is quite low, but B, it's competing against sawdust or other wood chip, etc. So in the event that we were to try and sell it to the sawmill, it would need to be converted to electricity. And so what I would have, one of the options in this was more around the sale of electricity to the sawmill or to some other party, which was included in my thought process. And it is possible. It is. There's two ways we could do that. We could obviously have our own engine at the landfill and take electricity down on wires, or we can put a pipe down and put the engine at their site and essentially have them look after it if we wanted to do it that way. And I had the same thought in regard to the hospital, whether we would do that in engines at the hospital and sell additional electricity at the hospital. So those are options. I haven't dug into those in any depth at this stage.
So I just think it'll be quite a logistical challenge around bottling gas. Not that I'm any expert, but just from a layperson's point, and distribution and all of those sorts of things.
Yes, it was going to be complex, and secondly, it would probably require a partner. So I wouldn't expect us to be doing it. I would expect us to go and talk to a gas sales company. We might register a trademark for green gas or something like that and sell it under our trademark, so that we owned the right. But we would probably do a deal with a gas sales company to manage that process on our behalf if we're going down that road.
Was there not some discussion at some stage that gas was going to be banned for some applications and bulbs?
Well, gas, I think it's quite difficult because people use this word gas, but actually what they really mean is fossil fuel derived gas, stuff that they've dug, they've piped out of the ground. In international literature and all the research that's been done, the least carbon effect of any fuel at the present time is actually using biogas in vehicles. So if we can use this material in a vehicle, we get the very significant savings because it's a renewable gas. We're using the existing fleet of engines, so we don't have to pay for new electric motors, etc. Batteries, all of that stuff. Yeah. So there is a justification. I have been involved with the Transport Forum and tried to convince some of the new Nelson businesses to be interested in the gas, and I haven't actually been successful at this stage. The fact that we have 2 million cubic meters of gas available, and that's equivalent to 2 million litres of diesel. There's a lot of diesel, but it's more than Fulton Hogan make in their biodiesel plant. They make 1 million litres a year of biodiesel in New Zealand. But I haven't found anybody particularly interested in buying it from me yet. So I have talked to Fonterra and others. So anyway, well, there's a lot of work to be done.
You've obviously done a very lot of work and research into this.
There's a lot of work to be done yet before these can be turned into something real.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mel.
Thank you. And thank you, Nathan, so much for this report. I think it's going to be invaluable. I really do. And I feel so comfortable with it, quite frankly. These are community assets that we're talking about, Eves Valley and York Valley. They are. So, yes, I do support your option 6 strongly, actually, but I'd like to see a balance, and I think you try and indicate that here, balance between a community asset and something more commercial. I really would like to. I think it's credible to do it that way, to have a balance there. But, I have been concerned for some time that we're going to have a light shone on us, this operation. And because my memory tells me that we contribute, Eves Valley and York Valley contribute about 80% of our carbon emissions. Now, sooner or later, there's going to be a day of reckoning. And I think we've been fortunate to get this far down the track without that light coming on to us full beam. And I'm just so comfortable with this that your mind is exercised on this, and you're just the person to do it with your background. And my question was simply this, that, are there interested parties? Have you got to the point? And of course, you've answered at 5:30 by saying you have spoken to one or two, but don't be disheartened, because everything starts with an idea, and this is an idea. It's a fabulous idea. It's for its time, quite frankly. And no, get disheartened a little, and 10 or 11 refusals, but just feel sorry for them. So if you've got any more to say on the interested parties, I'd be keen to hear. You've mentioned one, I think.
I have had considerable thoughts about different entities. I haven't entered into a lot of discussion at this stage because it's not really been mandated to do so yet. I think that some of the options that we have, the hot pools I see is not only being a solution to this, but also the potential for creating additional tourist activities. That's the use of an existing asset in Nelson City, potentially better. But it does definitely. These are big thinking things that the councils need to consider, and and it's not just for me to, and probably not just for this board, but I'm certainly keen to explore it a bit more and see whether it makes sense. I mean, we may find that it doesn't make sense at the end of the day. There might be too many constraints, too many fishhooks, at which point we might say, actually we'll go to something simpler or something easier. And similarly, we don't necessarily need to be the operator of these things. We might develop them, but engage somebody else to be involved, or to be our partner, or to co-fund or whatever. So, yeah.
So it's very early days, but it's exciting. Thank you.
Sorry, Trindy.
Yeah, I'm very supportive of it myself. I think it encapsulates the well-being of not just the people, but our environment as well. And our social conscience means that we should be addressing both in everything that we do. And I acknowledge it has an economic benefit as well. So for me, that's all the boxes tick for winning. So I'd also like to speak to the partnership, because I believe that is the right move to move forward, because we can't do all this as our own business unit. So looking at the right partners is probably my next step of advice moving forward. And yeah, so from me, it's a green light. And can you continue to investigate if everyone else agrees? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Look, I've probably got just a slightly different view. So I'm as keen as everyone else to progress this, but I'm just thinking about the processes and what the councils will need to see. Look, I'm already aware that the recent rainfall events have had significant impacts on the brook and on council budgets. And so I'm a little concerned, I guess, it may be reducing our options. But if I just pull backwards and go, what are the steps we need to do, and what are the steps we need to demonstrate to the two councils that we've done? And we did that with, we took that step when we were looking at all of our options for increasing the life of the landfill. So I just think of that process that we went through and put in that extra robust steps before we then picked our options. And, as it came out, here's our leachate options, and here was our, landfill stability ones, etc. And so I just feel that we've missed that step. And I think you all know this doesn't mean that I don't want to actually go full steam ahead. No pun with the use of the word steam. Actually on this, and if we could have been doing it yesterday, yes, I would have been, moving the resolution myself. But I just know, things unravel a little at the next stages if you haven't done that robust step there. And so I just think we need to make sure we've done that full. And I think, look, what's great is we've actually already got what's classified here as overarching guidelines is actually our matrix. pretty much already worked up of this is, those criteria we'd look at for analysing the different options, the economic return and the operational requirements, etc. And so I probably wouldn't mind just taking that one step backwards, doing that full analysis. I wouldn't mind some discussion with iwi potentially as well as part of this. And there will be other people we probably should just have a bit of engagement with. I don't necessarily think this puts us ultimately backwards at all. The business plan is, of course, we're working a lot in advance. And so the business plan is for 2023-4. So I don't think it impacts on the budget and what we've got in there. I just think we need to do that one step before resolution 2. So unless there's any aversion to that, I'll need to just take a brief break to rethink the wording for resolution 2. Stuart, oh, you look like you're ready to talk.
Yeah, I tend to agree with this. I think what you're just talking about is, and I was just looking at the resolution to see how we could perhaps encompass that, but yeah, it may need a whole new.
Yeah, I think we do. So look, what we'll do is just have a really brief adjournment and we'll work on some wording. Nathan, Alec, Richard might do that and ignore me altogether. Okay, 5-minute adjournment. Okay, so we're back on and we've got a revised resolution. So I'll just give everyone a second to read that. Happy with that? Everyone happy with that? So, yeah. So, you know, look, whether we need...
And just does that include engagement with the councils?
Well, yeah. So I was actually, look, you just read my mind. I was just about to say, we don't normally need to put all of that into a resolution, but there might be a workshop with councils, for example. But that's probably the detail that, you know.
In the new committee, so it's probably worth putting it in just to cover.
Yeah. Just so it's there for the record, yeah.
Okay. Including engagement with
Iwi and both councils.
Oh yeah, and we need to take out future joint committee meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could we change the words joint committee to so thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise it's going to the joint committee. It's not going there. Oops. I'm on the live stream. Anyway.
Take forever.
And then including engagement with the councils and iwi.
Yeah, that's better.
Hmm? Yeah.
You've taught me well.
I have, yeah. Look at you picking up words in a resolution.
Correct.
Yeah, so like just
one clarification of what we mean by that.
yeah. Yeah, so it's just taking into account because we did that with when we were looking at the major capital works, and we had a really good combined workshop with the two councils, and because of I think there'd be significant interest from both councils, and it would pay to have proactive engagement with them rather than having solutions in a business plan. I guess that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Clarify, just one about shooting engagement with councillors from both councils.
Yeah, you can debate it.
I'm being picky.
Yeah, okay, then we'll say elected members and include mayors. Because if we say councillors, that's not mayors. Yep. Okay, we'll just all spend a second to think and I'll turn my mic off. We might just adjourn again for a moment.
I mean, Richard and I were both
Okay, we're back again. Right, so we have the revised resolution. Further information is brought back to NTRLBU, detailing further analysis of all the options in line with good business case practices. The General Manager will continue to engage with various parties, as you have already. That will include iwi, council staff, but other, Eves Valley businesses, hospitals, etc. There's a very wide mandate there to have the discussions that are needed, and of course engage, use consultants as required to do this work, because it's probably a fairly sizable chunk of work. Your expertise notwithstanding, we've got you charged with doing a number of other things as well. And the next board will look forward to receiving that. So do I have someone happy to move? Trindy? Yep, and seconded by Mel. Okay, all those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much for your work on that report. That was a great discussion to have, and we really look forward to the progress on that area, because that's probably something over the last 3 years we've actually all been slowly honing towards. And so, yeah, that was a pretty exciting milestone to sign off to get that work underway. Okay, so we're now going to go to page 78, which is the business plan. And we need to take into account, we will already have one slight amendment. So the recommendation will need to reflect that one amendment, which is around the emergency fund. Yep. And we deferred the discussion on sort of expanding our purchasing of units to sort of look more, not just from sort of security of budgeting, but reducing impact on our finances years forward because of the very high potential of the cost doubling. So taking questions or comments on that as well. But Nathan, I'll now turn to you for the business plan. Thank you.
That's really true. Thank you. My summary is something like this. Within budgets to date over the last few years, we've fixed most of the problems of the past. We've put ourselves in a really good position. We've got a landfill that is to a high quality. A lot of the stuff that we're in this business plan is now looking to setting us up for the future, and it's about what should we do about the future, and including funding for some of those things. As Judine said, we need to have a conversation about ETS credits and the likes. We've agreed, the LDLs, a lot of those stuff is business as usual sort of things, except we need to, to decide where we go. So my focus here is more on the capital works program and the things that I've essentially been asking for or suggesting we might do. There's a bunch of what are fairly big ticket items, and I accept that they're potentially funding or capital supply issues, and we might need to consider that from that perspective. But we include in the business plan some elements of money for a facility at Eves Valley. The plan would be for Eves Valley. So it would initially be, so in this business plan, it's 23 to 24. There's some work that we need to do this year in the lead up to that, where we are looking to try and manage hail material in the region. So we'd ask that suppliers of that, or people who are disposing of that material, would dispose it to our facility. We'd get the records of their testing and from their chemical testing, because hail is always chemical tested before it comes to us. And the intent of this facility would be to take hail that's contaminated with one contaminant and actually mix it with material contaminated with different contaminants to dilute all of those contaminants to lower levels, so where we don't have to dispose it to landfill, or we can use it for other purposes. I've done some analysis, which will obviously have to be confirmed, which suggests that if we can do this and we assume 75% of that material can be diluted with other material, then it would reduce the hail costs to people disposing of hail in the region, and therefore it would encourage people to do that activity more responsibly. We know of potentially of cases in the past where people have not disposed it appropriately, and we don't want that. So the idea of this is to firstly to manage hail effectively in the region and try not to dispose in landfill. Secondly, it's to divert material from York Valley so that we can safeguard the airspace in York Valley and dispose of it, and not in a class 1 landfill. So we save that class 1 landfill airspace. And thirdly, obviously, if we can divert it back out for reuse in the community, because it's now diluted below the requirements, then that would be obviously ideal. So that's one of those pieces of funding that I've asked for. The second piece of funding is I want to look at trialling a new technology, essentially, for disposal of waste. At the moment, we get 25 tonnes of sawdust a week. Sawdust is a very low density material. Most of that sawdust we get is contaminated with chrome copper arsenate, so it's obviously can't be used in a fire, because when it's burned, all that those contaminants get released into the atmosphere. It takes up a lot of airspace, and it's also considered a carbon source in the landfill, so it contributes to the ETS quite significantly. So there are technologies out there that can break that material down and turn it into oil or into fuel, and we could then use that fuel for some other purpose. And it would, at the present time, at York Valley, the indications are that around 40% of the waste that we receive could be actually put through a facility like this. So that would significantly reduce the overall demand for airspace and increase the length of the duration of the York Valley landfill and or Eves Valley in the future. It is a big ticket item, and it is new technology, and I would very much not recommend us selecting a technology and just going into something. I would definitely consider testing it and demonstrating it for ourselves first. I guess this has come forward faster in our plan than I was thinking it would. And the reason it's come forward faster is because some of the work we've been doing on the long-term consenting process has been looking at what we would do as alternative options. And there are some facilities in New Zealand and around the world that we've been talking to where it looks like the cost is significantly lower for these technologies and service than the cost we're paying to landfill. And if that's the case, and we're talking, costs that people are saying in the order of 50% of what we pay, then we really have to look at it sensibly, and we have to dig into it and understand. So the first piece of the work is do more detailed, assessments, and the second piece of the work would be trialing a facility that we've selected and see if we. And the third, obviously, post that would be looking at some sort of future thing. We wouldn't necessarily have to invest in it ourselves. I mean, we've been in contact with some of the sawdust providers and some of the other members of the community that waste discharges, and some of them are interested in being involved in a capital position in something facility like this. So there's been quite a lot of pressure in recent times around a better solution for sawdust. So there is a possibility of partnering deals, etc. But in the event that we wanted to do something, I think we really need to do some pre-work to be able to get us there first and demonstrate that it is actually effective in our situation. So those are two of the big elements, and they're principally the two that I think that the board need to seriously consider or consider whether they do or don't want to go forward with. I guess that's probably as far into that as I'd like to go, and I'm open to questions.
Okay, thank you. Open up for questions. Mel.
I hadn't really got my finger up yet, but
I
you read my mind.
Look.
I was thinking I had several questions on hail earlier on in the other papers, and
Yeah.
so this fits in quite well with me. I wanted to know of examples of these facilities for hail working in some of the locations, and the cost of them and all that type of thing. Is it is it a well-known way of dealing with the hail?
Through the chair, there are a few facilities doing this, but not a lot of facilities doing this at this stage. So I don't have a lot of detail on it, and I'm quite more than happy to. In fact, there's a lot of work to be done again with this one to make sure that it actually stacks up. Then the economics that I've done on it indicate two things. Obviously, that quality control is very important. So we need to be obviously on top of our game in terms of understanding what the chemical constituents of those contaminants are, and not only when it comes in, but after we've blended it. So there's quite a cost associated with chemical analysis on the hail post our blending. And secondly, the reuse of that material, the transport costs are the thing that govern the feasibility most significantly. If we have to truck that material out for reuse at our cost, it's a very significant sum, and it would undermine the feasibility of this. If we can, if other people are willing to pay for that material, or if we can dispose it in a clean fill close to or on Eves Valley site, then it makes it even cheaper than the assessments that I've done. So there's definitely more work in here before we'll actually physically install the system, but I think it will result in a significant improvement to hail management within the region.
And through you, Janine, so they are actually operating in various parts of New Zealand already. You're familiar.
That's my understanding. There's a couple. I will confirm that to you in the future. In future, though.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, I've got a couple of questions myself. Just on report. Just firstly with the budget, probably goes without saying, but it includes the carry forwards, doesn't it? Yep. Any?
No, not for this year.
No, sorry. Yeah.
No, we can't.
We're working so far ahead. Sorry. Yep. Ignore me.
I think we took it into account in calculating the depreciation from memory.
Right. Yep. Okay. Okay, so then I guess, so the emergency fund, so this year, it's not actually in the budget per se, but can you explain, I know it's not for next year, but so for this year, how does it work? And then for the business plan, do we need to then make a modification for it?
On page 96, there is a surplus of 119,000. So that is the existing surplus that hasn't been used historically, or to recover the historic losses spread over the next 9 years. And Brad has very helpfully changed the spreadsheet to include it, reduce that by 25,000 over the period, which brings that back to 91,000, and it tips the gate price rounding up $1 because it's rounded to $1. It was just below 50 cents before. It's just gone over 50. So, yeah.
Okay.
Did that answer the question?
Partially. No. Maybe it did, but not to me. Okay.
So what you have before you doesn't include the 250,000.
No. So we really should do another new line?
No, it just changes that surplus that's available to be spread going forward, which will consequently adjust the gate price by $1.
Okay, and that's the general refuse rate?
Yes.
Page 94?
Yep.
The 221 going up to 222?
Correct.
So I did follow you. Excellent.
Outstanding.
Okay, thank you. Just 11.1, the battery diversion, and all due deference to the two councils, why don't they just ask for more money in the LDL instead of us giving them money to support the project?
Through the chair, there are two reasons in my mind for that. One is that the LDL is the lower of the two numbers. So if the councils were to ask us for the money and they needed it, and they might not get it because the other council might not have asked it. That's one thing. That's potentially a little bit irrelevant. The second is, and which I think is more important, is that NTRLBU has been the driving force behind battery diversion.
Yes.
The reason we've been the driving force is not, while we want to minimise waste, it hasn't been our core focus. Our core focus has been fire management, right? And so I have taken it on my shoulders and the NTRLBU shoulders to continue to pay for the disposal of those batteries, because it principally benefits
Supports us
in
yeah.
fire management.
Yep.
And that's the reason that I've added it to my budget and not to the two councils.
Fairly relaxed. It was just, yeah, okay, that makes sense. My next question is probably
through the chair, just on the LDL. Can I just clarify under 2.111?
Yep.
Nelson City Council asked for 3.2 million, and that's okay. I've just checked I just checked my email to you, Nathan. And it's neither here nor there. It's still the lowest of the two, but I just want to clarify that.
okay. So that number, Nelson City Council requested an LDL of 3.2.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Alec. Yep. No. Perfect. Thank you. My next question's to Andrew again. But feel free to chip in, Nathan. Okay. So if we were to buy further forward to try and mitigate the spiralling costs, for lack of any other better word, when something's potentially going to double, spiralling seems like the best word to describe it. What impacts would that make on the budgeting and what we have here before us?
So the first thing it would do would provide certainty around your cost in future years 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Because there is estimates in there about future costs, and it's almost changing by the week. The second thing, there would be a cash flow cost.
Yeah.
So we would need to, which is not provided for within the budget.
Yep.
So we'd be looking to borrow more from the two councils to fund it, to fund the early purchase. But what it does do, it gives us that certainty for next year now, but it also fixes the price.
Yep.
The market can go up and it can also go down. When you're old like me, you remember markets going the other way.
Yep.
But the minimum price under current rules is increasing.
Mm.
So the likelihood of that happening is low, but then we don't make the rules and the rules can change.
Yes.
Is another risk.
Yep.
that you're putting yourself into. So we have a policy which allows us to go,
yep.
But you, the members, have the authority to take a position which staff do not.
So
I have a personal view.
yeah. So with the cost containment reserve potentially doubling, if we were to buy at today's rate,
yep.
The odds are that even if suddenly that cost containment reserve price dropped again, it would be unlikely to go from a projected double to actually less than what it is today. I mean, the odds of that would seem very low.
It's happened twice. So we bought one time and then in the next month it dropped. But then that was around $27
yeah.
and $30. So it's dropped in the last week because there was the third auction held. So it dropped $2 as a result of that auction. But the number of units available for auction from the government is reducing. The minimum price is increasing. The current forward pricing for that for 25 is $100. So if you buy options to buy, you would pay $98 for April 25 delivery.
Yeah.
So that's for the year ending 2024 calendar year.
Yeah.
So if you decided to go and buy, it's probable that you, in looking back in 2 years' time, you would say, what wonderful people. And from an economic point of view, but from a climate change point of view, you might have a different view.
Working on those other things anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so what impact would that have on the financials within here?
So
If we said to you, we want to do more purchasing, for the further years, what impact would that have on this and the numbers that stand?
So in the funding, there would be an increased investment in carbon units and an increased loan. In the operations, there would be an interest cost, which probably would not be material enough to change the rounding on the gate price for year, but you'll fix the price for that year. So you might actually reduce 25-20 or 24-25 and 25-26.
Okay, thank you, Nathan.
So through the year, there are essentially three options. Do nothing, which is securing which is our current paradigm, which is securing and being confident in the price so that we've got price security for the year that we are doing our budget for, which is what we currently have. And so we know and we hold stocks of the units for the year that we are looking at now. The second option is obviously buy forward additional, because in all likelihood, my judgment is that the price will increase. Demand is low, is not there, and demand is there and supply is not. But supply and demand would suggest the price will go up. The third option might be that we could buy options. I mean, if you didn't want to, and Andrew's shaking his head, I'm sit on that fence too. But if you are in a capital constrained environment, that might be a way that you would do it. If we thought that we didn't have capital available to expend it, we might choose to invest in options. And essentially, what happens? Someone else buys them, or we buy them off them at some later stage at a different number. But those are the options. Those are the things that we have in hand. Historically, when we've discussed these issues, we've talked about the fact that philosophically, our residents have chosen to increase the cost of landfilling. They've said that they wanted to discourage landfilling by increasing the cost, essentially. And one of the reasons we chose not to hedge further forward was because we saw that the hedging further forward was not necessarily responding to the change in an ETS price. The only reason we've done it, hedging like we have, was so that we have secure budgeting ability. This, if we chose to invest further and hedge further, would change that from being, budget security to being more about reducing the cost to the community, or security of the cost to the community in the future. I strongly believe, personally, that the cost of carbon will increase. That's my own personal opinion. I think that if the cost containment reserve number goes in at $171 a tonne and then up to $223 a tonne following that, which is what the Climate Change Commission has recommended to the government, and the government hasn't accepted yet, but it will accept or not in later this year or early next year, that the price will jump at that time. Now, I don't know philosophically or from a community perspective, but ideally I like trying to protect my community.
Isn't another part of that though, is that the waste levy itself has now got increasing jumps anyway. So the philosophy of, that user pays philosophy and is already embedded into this. And so whereas before it was perhaps our only mechanism because those increases have only come in the last few years. And so therefore, that's not our sole consideration anymore. So when we made that position, it was based on those waste levies weren't increasing. And so this was our way to manage it. But now we've got multiple considerations because those, quite significant increases in the waste levies. And so it's not about us, taking our foot off, that user pays ethos. It's actually about trying to balance multiple considerations. And I think in balancing those multiple considerations, it's also looking at, the fact of what we are doing now on emissions reductions is more than we've ever done as well. But we still have a responsibility, a fiscal responsibility around management. And I guess for me, if we end up with some extreme costs in a few years, that might then negatively impact on our ability to do gas reuse work, for example, or some other things. And so, I think the community would be more dismayed in us not doing gas, progressing gas reuse work than hedging a bit further forward for that reason. So I think, that was the philosophy a few years ago, and things have changed a lot since then. So that's my view on it. Did you have your hand up, Trinity? No. Okay. Anyone got Mel? Your microphone.
I feel comfortable with that. It makes sense to me. I don't think can't add any more to that. I'm quite happy.
Okay, so Andrew, what does this mean for how much work have we created for you?
Not much at all.
Oh,
So if you wanted to buy beyond the policy, then you would need to direct us to.
yes.
And
Yeah.
Do I own carbon? Yes. Am I thinking of selling? No.
Through the chair, would we be looking at one additional year, or are we looking at? Is there any justification on, or are we looking at a dollar sum, or is there anybody who ultimately someone needs to say something about what sort of level of hedging that we might choose to do?
Andrew, do you have any recommendation around that?
To buy a year's worth is about $3 million.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. What do we currently spend a year? What's this year's?
2 point something.
Actually not in the.
Okay, what I might do is just have a
for context, if we hadn't done the work that we've done, I think we would be exposed to 8 million a year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It is a big sum of money. We're talking about the waste levy going up $10.
Yeah.
We're talking about their carbon costs going up from currently $80 to $220. So that's another $40 in comparison. It makes the waste levy relatively minor where you're heading.
Yeah, so we've got to spend money to save money.
Yeah, exactly. Okay,
so look, I'm just going to have a brief adjournment and allow Andrew time to look up a couple of things. So we'll just have a brief adjournment. ETS matter, in clarification or fresh information that's been provided to us, we need to deal with that for this financial year, the one we're currently in, rather than future. So for that matter, we will need to reopen the General Manager's report. Now, under standing orders, if we have been provided with fresh information, which we have, then we can have a resolution to reopen that, and I'll come to that in a moment. And so for the business plan, the only amendment we have is that one amendment of including the emergency fund, and just clarifying is that it will not change our general refuse charge, because that was a rounding matter only. So you can round up or you can round down from 50 cents. So we're going to keep the rounding it going down. And so it will remain at the 221 as per page 94. So has anyone got any further questions or clarifications on the business plan? Because otherwise we will go to the resolutions for that item, which is on pages 79 and 80. Okay, so we've got no further questions. So the recommendation, so the only change is in resolution 2, it will say approves the amended business plan, and that's the amendment we've just discussed about the emergency fund. The recommendation to Nelson City and Tasman District Council will stay the same, because Nathan and Andrew will update the business plan, so the councils will get the final one. So that makes it simpler for that.
With the amendments. Sorry, they'll get the one that has the amendments in it.
Yes. Okay, so are there any further questions or clarifications on the business plan before we look for a mover for the resolutions? Okay, so move Stuart, seconded by Mel. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're now just going to quickly go back to the General Manager's report, which is on page 17. And so the resolution is that in accordance with standing orders, that we have received fresh information. So the resolution is up on board, confirms that fresh information has been received in respect to item 7, and an amendment to the resolution is proposed. So I'll happy to move that myself. So I'll move that, and seconded Trindy. Thank you. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. And so now we go back to the matter we were discussing, which was the purchase of the carbon credits. And so we've got approved the purchase of up to an additional 12 months worth of carbon credits beyond the current business unit treasury policy. So that enables Andrew to have that flexibility to potentially do it into 6-month tranches. But I think it's important to, we've got the limit, but it builds the flexibility into that approach. Is there any further questions or clarifications sought on that resolution? Andrew. Sorry, do you want to use your microphone?
We probably don't need the words worth of in there.
Yes, correct. So up to an additional 12 months of carbon credits. Yes, so the word worth needs to be deleted. Thank you, Andrew. Good clarification. Because it doesn't work on calendar years. Yep, thank you. Any further questions or clarifications? Okay, so Stuart's happy to move. Seconded by Mel. All those in favour? Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you for that fresh information, Andrew. And so now we go to our final report, which is page 106, which is the Governance Agreement Review Report. And I'll hand over to you, Nathan. Thank you.
Thank you through the chair. This report is basically a summary of some of the actions that have occurred in reviewing the deed of agreement and the terms of reference. There's been ongoing issues or concerns about some conflicts within those documents, and there's been some issues with timing and sort of a lack of clarity. So the committee asked for a review of those documents to see if they could be streamlined. Initially, it was asked about whether we could streamline them in conjunction with the Nelson Regional Sewerage Business Unit ones as well. And the chairs chose to not do anything to the Nelson Regional Sewerage Business Unit governance documents, given that Three Waters is just around the corner and that they were reasonably consistent with the intent. One of the things that was always a bit of a bugbear for myself and for governance advisors was that we had a deed of agreement which said certain things and allowed us to do certain things, and we had terms of reference that also said we could do certain things, and they were different. And so the process is the legal people have been through it and looked at all these issues and have made some recommended changes. What has complicated the process quite considerably is the fact that the NTRLBU operates under an authority from the Commerce Commission, and that authority allows us to do certain things. But the lawyers were concerned that if we made significant change to these deed of agreement or terms of reference, it might contravene or undo the conditions of the Commerce Commission authority. So a lot of the changes that we might otherwise have made have not necessarily been done because there was concerns about the authority being affected. And so this is a summary report, and it included the revised deed of agreement in terms of reference in the back. So that's any questions on that.
And one of the other changes that is a helpful one, which we've just was that we'd wanted was our business plan normally has to come currently by October, and that has been pushed out to December. So that's because we're trying to create a budget now to start 1 July 2023, which is quite a stretch. So there's a lot of changes, but the significance of them are still minor in total, mainly because of that Commerce Commission oversight. I want to thank Alec and Richard in particular, who put in quite a bit of time working with the lawyers, but reviewing all the changes, because we need to still make sure that we're doing our parts to align with council's budgets, because they also have some very strict timeframes and bigger budgets than ours to work through. But I think, we have a good partnership and a good synergy anyway. So look, lots of changes, but they are mainly about those inconsistencies. As Nathan said, some of them probably didn't go as far as we might have liked, but we had that backstop of the Commerce Commission ruling. So any questions?
Through the chair.
Oh, sorry, Stuart. Just use your microphone.
We're on the right one, aren't we?
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm just checking we were on the right one, but I'm happy to move the resolutions as proposed.
Thank you very much. Move Stuart, seconded Mel.
Yep.
All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That's carried. Thank you very much. That's that was the final report on our agenda. So the annual report, the business plan, and those amended governance documents will go to the final council meetings of this triennium, so 22 or 29 September, depending on when they fit in the agendas. Still just little bit more work on those items, but yeah, really great to be able to get those finished in this term of council. So look, as we close, thank you again for all your incredible mahi around this table. It is very much appreciated, and just acknowledging also all the extra work that a lot of you have done, particularly Richard and Alec through our civil defence emergency, and thank you both for your contribution beyond the councils, but to our communities as a whole. So I'll close with a karakia. Tuia ke ronga, tuia ke raro, tuia ke roto, tuia ke wahu, tuia te hera tangata, ka ronga te pou, ka ronga te ao, hui e, tā ki e. Kia ora. Thank you.